וכי נפשי es Hashem. Today, page 40, we're going to discuss first and foremost the issue of bishul. In other words, we're going to complete the issue we discussed day before yesterday and yesterday in regard to cooking, and then we continue, time allow, the several issues with washing in different form, warming, and if time allow, we'll go to the next melacha. 40, the top of the page. Ve'im michlal amai dilma hanemile b'matnitin aval b'braita lo. We discussed yesterday, we finished our discussion by having two opinions of Tanaim, which means two sages have an opinion, one different than the other, and then you have the third one who come in and rules. It's like the formulation of the Bet Din, which is uneven in judges. You have two, one said yes, one say no, and then you have the third one who's Av. But the issue here, when we dealt with Tumah and Tahara, is the third one was Rabbi Akiva, who's number one, the student of those rabbis, and therefore he cannot rule against them. Two, they said that he changed his mind and he followed Rabbi Yoshua. So the bottom line is, they said, Amar lo ana befirush miali. I heard directly from Rabbi Yochanan that the halacha is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, what's the whole discussion for those who are not familiar? We discussed the idea of washing a person's body on Shabbat. And what we said is, washing person's body, if it's a cold water, as long as he's not using a shampoo for the hair. Why? Because that is a deoraita, to pull out hair while you shampoo. But if you're doing the body with cold water, it's not an issue. However, if you're using a warm water, then we have an issue. We have a different opinion. We discuss an option such as using just facial, hands, legs, other part of the body. And then the bottom line, we said that the rule is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda is the one who's the Machriya, Rashba said. Itmar. So after the Gemara come to conclusion that the person cannot wash his entire body in Shabbat with hot water, and again, let's make it clear. What we said is, if a person is a chassid, he wants to duck himself in a mikveh on Shabbat. We said in the Mishnah Brura and Kadakemach, we said that a person can go and use a mayim poshrim, which means water that warm up in advance on Shabbat, and it's fine. Even there are some who's not even doing that, they're just going by cold water. But let's face it, if it's a very cold winter and a person wants to go in a daily basis, including Shabbat, to the mikveh, then we explain that the resolution is to go to a water that will either warm up in advance, or according to some poskim, if they have some type of a system that doesn't change the status of the water, which means you keep them in a certain temperature with a certain gufei chimum, a certain way that it's keep the water in a certain temperature, which is mayim poshrim, which is not a hot water but not freezing cold water. Some poskim say that it's fine, but in any event, we're not speaking about ducking in a mikveh. We're speaking about taking a shower. So in that sense, we said that doing shower for the entire body with the hot water is forbidden. And if you remember, we explained why. It was gzerat merchatzaot and gzerat abalanim, and we explained a little bit yesterday. And later the Gemara elaborate. The key point is that in those days they used to make a bathhouses. People in the ancient time doesn't have a personal shower like we are privileged to have it nowadays. So when you have a bathhouses, you have those nesarim, which is the wood part, on the floor, that they have a hole in those netzarim, and the heat come from the ground, for example. The problem was that some of the people, in other words, the people who in charge for the bathhouse, used to do, which we call several days ago, chitui begechalim, which means removing the coal on Shabbat. Meaning, since they realize they get paid, and they realize that the temperature is not sufficient, they may violate the Shabbat. Another issue is that the body, when the body is sweat, like you go to a sauna, it's come out of the body the wet part, you sweat out of that, and it's a problem on Shabbat. So the rabbis put the gzera, soon you read it in the Gemara, it's gzerat hamerchatzaot. Basically, a person cannot go to shower and wash his body in the hot water fully. You can use it with the water that prepare in advance before Shabbat, some part of the body, like we explained earlier, but not washing entirely. Itmar, chamin shu chamu me'erev Shabbat. If you have a hot water that prepared in advance before Shabbat, Rav Amar lemachar rochetz bahen kol gufo ever. Rav said, if you have a tub filled of water that prepared in advance before Shabbat, the next day, which is Shabbat, a person can wash part of his body. Meaning, according to Rav, this Gzerat HaMerchatzaot decree for the bathhouses that you cannot use on Shabbat a water that was warmed up in advance, apply solely for using it in order to wash your entire body. But if you need to wash part of your body, part by part, that's permissible. ושמואל אמר, לא התירו לרחוץ, אלא פניו, ידיו ורגליו. Shmuel go a little stricter, and he said it's not applied to the part of his body, which means basically the whole body, you're just going part by part. He said no. What I understand is the prohibition saying that you can wash only the part which is face, hand, and feet. Meitive, the Gemara asks a question that basically follow what we asked earlier in the previous page. חמין שהוא חמום מערב שבת, למחר רוחץ בהם פניו, ידיו ורגליו, אבל לא כל גופו. If you have a hot water that prepared in advance before Shabbat, the next day, which is Shabbat, you can go ahead and wash your entire body. You wash your face, hand, and feet, but not the entire body. Tiyuvta de Rav. Why it's question for the Rav? Because what Rav said, that you can wash your entire body limb by limb, part by part. Here you see that it said only for what? Face,
hands and feet.
Hands and feet. Thank you. Amar lach Rav responded to that and he said, Lo kol gufo bevat achat, ela ever. He said, what you're saying is the same as I said. I said that not washing the entire body, I said part by part. So they ask him, wait a second, what do you mean? We said specifically that applied to face, hand, and feet. He said, Ke'ein panav yadav veraglav. He said, you know what the Braita meant? They meant to say that you can wash your entire body the same manner that you wash your face, hand, and leg. Meaning, you can wash your entire body, but each of the part of the body separately. Tashma. So another question on Rav. לא התירו לרחוץ בחמין שהוא חמום ערב שבת, אלא פניו, ידיו ורגליו. The same question. And not ever, not limb by limb, the entire body. Tashma. So he answered, he said, הכנמי כאין פניו, ידיו ורגליו, which means that it looks like you are focusing on the face, because that's the part that people usually care for, but it's applied to the entire body. Tanya Kvatei de Shmuel. Now we go the other direction. The Shmuel, חמין שהוא חמום ערב שבת למחר וחץ בין פניו ולב רגליו, אבל לא כל גופו עבר עבר. ואין צריך לומר בחמין שהוא חמום ביום טוב. Shmuel said that if you have a hot water that prepared in advance before Shabbat, the next day, which is Shabbat, you can wash face, hand, feet, right? And Rav said, you can do, you can do the entire body as long as you lift out one part of the body you not wash. For example, your head. For example, another part of the body, your back. So they said, if that's the story, he said, Eitivei kol hanet yuvta, Eitivei, which means they raised all of these conclusive refutation with which they objected to the previous version of Rav's statement. Against him, and the Gemara concluded, indeed, it is a conclusive refutation, which means that it's a contradiction between Rav saying earlier one way and what Rav's saying now. It's two different things. Now, what we wrap up, what we understand here, it's that basically the key of this machloket, it's because of that gzera. But we need to elaborate. So before we elaborate, now they want to go to a practical way. The practical way meaning how Rava used to do it at his place. Amar le Rav Yosef LaAbaye, Rabba mika avid eshmaatei de Rav. How Rabba used to do it in his place. So in order to understand that, let's first see what Rashi said. Rashi previously said רוחץ בהן רוחץ כעין פניו, כלומר עבר בפני עצמו. Rashi have here the word klomar, so I elaborate in my book on klomar in Rashi, and I explain that here Rashi, in my view, intend to say that it's appear like he's taking his entire body and washing it, but basically it's each part separately. What Rashi have a problem, when you use that term, it's basically you are like cheating yourself. Why? Because basically what you're saying is the person washed entire body, but instead of saying he's washing entire body, you said he washed part by part. So therefore Rashi said that it has to be in a manner of separation, which means it have to be separate way, like you turn off and on, like you go and you basically take a towel and dry one part and then you go another part, etc. But here Rav Yosef said to Abaye how in practical manner Rabba did a part and part of his body. As we said earlier, Abaye was orphan from a very young age, and he was raised in a house of Rabbah. So here he wants to see how he practices. Amar lei lo yadana, he said, I don't know. Mighty bayale, what's the question? Pshita de lo avida itotav. It's clearly that he didn't do it. They said lo shmi alei. Rav Yosef did not hear that, so he was in a question what Rabba really did. Ve'ilo shmi alei vaday avid. If he didn't hear that his way contradicted, so for sure he did that way. So anything, since Abaye was raised in a house of Rabbah, he said that everything we did according to the Rav, excluding three different time, bar mehanetlat, excluding three different halachot. The avid ke Shmuel, that he did according to Shmuel. Number one, metilin mibeged lebeged. You have talit, tzitzit. One, it's worn out. You use it for a long time. Now you want to have a new one. Question, can I go ahead and unnut the old talit, put it on a new one? or since I put it in one place, it should stick in one. So here they said you allow to go ahead and remove from one to another. Why? Because the fear is, it's called bizui mitzvah. You're basically denigrating the mitzvah. Why? Because you use that tzitzit, that talit, for a period of time. Now you're basically taking off, so you change the status of that clothing. Instead of being sacred clothing that wearing the tzitzit, now you remove it and you put it in something else. But he said here, you can go and do it. For example, if you bought a new clothing and you want to remove from the old one to the new one, you can take the tzitzit and remove it. The Bach in Or HaChaim Tedvav said clearly that you can go ahead and do it. However, it's very important to know that you're not allowed to remove the tzitzit from one talit to another if you're not from one talit if you not intend to put it in another. In other words, just to untight the knot of the talit in order to remove it, you can do it only if you intend to put it in another, because that's called in halacha bizui mitzvah, that you denigrating the mitzvah. Rav hold, unlike Shmuel, that you cannot do it regardless. But in this manner, halacha is according to Shmuel. You remember the story of Goldman in New York, by the way? It's a story about the fellow that used to go to a dry cleaner. And he used that Goldman dry cleaner for years and years and years in New York. One day he came there and he noticed that there's a new Chinese people on the dry cleaners. No. So he brought all the clothing, and then he was about to pick them up, and he turns that the guy charged him for talit like $25. So he paid him, and then he said to the owner, the Chinese guy, he said, "Excuse me, I knew that it's still named Goldman, I don't see the Goldman." He says, "No, we bought it from them." He says, "Okay, so why for this clothing Goldman used to charge me $4 or $5, you're charging me $25? He said, "Sir, do you know how long it took us to unknot your big clothing?" You see, they saw all the knot in the tzitzit. They sat for hours and pull it out in order to do dry cleaning. Anyway, so I thought it's funny. And the second one, umadlikim miner lener. The issue here is in Hanukkah candles. When we have a Hanukkah candle, we basically allow to go ahead and transfer light from one candle to another. When it's come to Hanukkah, it's not just we lenient, but Rav hold that the minute you light one candle, you cannot transfer from one to another. But earlier in the 22, if you remember, when we have the discussion, they explain why Rav hold this way. But we hold like Shmuel that you can go ahead and transfer light if you need from one candle to another. The third one, halacha k'Shmuel, v'halacha halacha k'Rabbi Shimon, not Shmuel. The third one, halacha k'Rabbi Shimon begrira, which means on Shabbat we cannot take a bed and move it while it's on the ground, because the fear is that you can make a hole on the ground while you take the bed and move it. Now, what it's called, if you remember earlier we discussed, it's called davar she'eno mitkaven u'psik reishe, which means while you're moving the bed from one location to another, even you don't intend to, you're basically doing something that create a work. So everyone agreed. What?
It's like plowing. You're creating
plowing, yes. So everyone agreed that that's forbidden in the Torah. It's either building or plowing, depending how you look at that. So since always Rabbah go by the way of Rav, why Rav Yosef need to ask how Rav behaving in a sense of washing on Shabbat. So the answer, and they said, Kechumrei de Rav Avid, that Rabbah go by the stringencies of Rav, excluding the 3 halachot that he goes according to Shmuel. Kekulei de Rav lo Avid, whenever he was lenient, he didn't go by him, which means that when it's come to this, he hold that you cannot wash the entire body in the water, including part by part, only face, hand, and feet. So what basically you're saying is that part and part of the body, that's fine. But if you need to wash, you can use the cold one. In Israel, for example, many mikvot has a freezing cold, middle one, and very hot. I use always the freezing one for 2 reasons. First of all, it's not halachic issues, right? Shabbat during the week. Second of all, it's the cleanest one for simple reason, less people wants to use it, right? But the trick is, when you go to the freezing cold, you walk out, you feel warm.
This is true,
right? So it is what it is. But anyway, now we elaborate on Gzerat HaMerchatzaot, which means this Braita came after we already discussed earlier the Merchatzaot. Tanu Rabanan, this is Tosefta. Merchatz shepakeku nekavav me'erev Shabbat. If you have a bathhouse that opening were sealed on Erev Shabbat, on Shabbat Eve, so that the heat will not diminish after Shabbat. So they said, Lemotzei Shabbat rochetz bo miyad. So in the time of the Talmud, the heat come from the ground. In other words, it was like a basement that they have in our language, in our time, is like the boiler's room, but it's the heat that come underground, and that hot go to the hole in the ceiling of the basement up, and they used to seal those holes on Friday before Shabbat. Okay? Now, the minute you sealed it, then the bathhouse cannot be heat further on Shabbat. So because it wasn't heat on Shabbat, so they said here, you don't need to wait bichdei shia, so you don't need to wait after Shabbat in a certain time to warm up the water. You can warm up, the Ran said, right the way. Pakeku nekavav me'erev Yom Tov. If those sealed pieces that you sealed the floor in order to avoid the heat from coming to a basement, so if that it's open on Eve of Yom Tov, lemachar nichnas umezia, which means a person can go ahead on Yom Tov, which means Rashi said that he stand or sit in the bathhouse, but he will not put the water on the top of him, but he naturally, like you go to the dry sauna, he naturally have a sweat from the heat. ויוצא ומשתתף בבית החיצון, since it was a different room in the bathhouse, so he go to the external house and he basically take then partially wash his body, those pieces, but he cannot do it in the inside room. Why? Because it was a different time, a different decree. At the beginning, the rabbis put a prohibition against washing in the bathhouse, both and Shabbat and Yom Tov, but it was not any prohibition against having sweat that coming out of body, which means they said after you go to that dry sauna, you cannot wash yourself in the body. You have to go to outside room, and there you can partially wash the body. But that's the Tosfot said here, Dibur Matchil Motzei Shabbat, that it's regardless Shabbat and Yom Tov. Now, גזירת המרחצאות, that decree that put later, applied even for water that was warm out before Yom Tov. So basically here we said, אמר רבי יהודה responded and said, מעשה במרחץ של בני ברק, it was a bathhouse in the city of בני ברק, שפקקו נקביו מערב יום טוב, that those a seal point in the floor of the bathhouse that connected to the basement, and you remember the heat, the warm part, the fire came from the basement, and that place was closed to seal, to avoid a heat from coming from a basement. למחר נכנס רבי אלעזר בן עזר ורבי עקיבא והזיעו. The next day Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azar came in, and they have this like hazaa is like they sweat. ויצאו, what?
Steam bath.
Steam bath.
Yeah.
ויצאו ונשתתפו בבית החיצון. However, they ring themselves in the outer house. אלא שהחמין שלו מחופין בין שרים. This bathhouse was unique because the hot water was covered by wooden boards, and there was no concern lest the person bathed in the hot water. So that's what Rashi said. So Rabbi Yehuda that tells us this story, he meant to say that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva use this hot water with something that you're not concerned that this water was warm on Shabbat. So what we understand, that prohibition apply to the entire body to do it in Shabbat. And we understand also that this story happened on Shabbat, not on Yom Tov. That's the way that the Ritva understand this. But he said, כשבא הדבר לפני חכמים, when this matter came before the sages, אמרו אף על פי שאין חמין שלא מחופין בין שרים, even if its hot water would not cover by boards, it's permitted to sweat from the heat in the bathhouse. So, in other words, because the entire part of the heating was before Shabbat, so you can partake of that on Shabbat, and you're not concerned about the hot water that warm indirectly from that bathhouse. That's the Ritva. According to the Tosfot, the meaning of the sages is that even those bathhouse was not covered with the wooden part, you can use a cold water in the outside shower place, and you're not worried about people who suspected you and think that you wash with the hot water. So let's wrap it up. There are 5 points here that I would like to share with you. We're talking about the dinim, the halakhot in regard to taking a bath on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Point 1. Hot water that warm up on Shabbat, a person is forbidden to wash his entire body fully or partially on Shabbat. Again, we speak first and foremost if the water was warmed on Shabbat itself. Okay? Not even part of the body allowed to be used on Shabbat. Point 2. Water that was warmed up in advance before Shabbat, you can go ahead and on Shabbat you wash part of the body like face, hand, leg, or other part of the body that it's not the entire body, but you cannot use that warm water that was prepared in advance for the entire body, even you use part by part. 3. Water that was warmed up during festivals on Yom Tov. So you cannot use that water on festival. However, unlike Shabbat, you can use that water for face, hand, and feet. It is a dispute among the sages if you can use other part that it's not entire body. water that was warmed up in the eve of Yom Tov, before the holiday. Here you have a serious machloket, one group of rabbis, which is Rashi, Rif, Rambam, meaning the Sephardic, the old Sephardic rabbis, said that you can go ahead and allow on Yom Tov to use that water for the entire body, but it has to be outside of the bathhouse. But in the bathhouse, especially in the old days, you cannot do that. And the other one is the Tosfot here that hold that regardless to location, you cannot use the water in any place. However, they allow, even the Tosfot allow to use part of the body, meaning part by part by part by part. But that's, again, we're talking about Yom Tov festival, not Shabbat. Shulchan Aruch Harav and Shulchan Aruch and Rema in Taf Kuf Yud Aleph in 5:11, they said clearly that this applied to Yom Tov, not to Shabbat, part by part. Now, in regards to a cold water, that's a different story. In very general term, there are most of the rabbis hold that you can use cold water. Again, the big question is
for bathing the entire body.
Oh, so the big thing is entire body is not so simple.
Right.
If you talk entire body, excluding the hair part,
right,
that's different story. Hair part, there are several issues. Is the issue of schita, is issue of that some hair, if you use conditioner or use certain shampoo, the hair come out, and that's one of the 39 prohibition biblically.
Isn't there also an issue of then squeezing water out of your hair?
That's what I said, schita.
Okay.
Schita.
So,
so therefore, the hair is the issue. Yes.
So in that case, on Shabbos, we shouldn't wash we ear or wet we hair. Yes.
Head, no.
Just from here.
Just face. Yes. Good point.
But then even if you do your face, you got to be careful with your beard, of not that you don't squeeze the water out of your beard.
Few people have beard like us. Most of the people doesn't have here. All right. Now we're going to a little bit history, because it's increased people who transgress the Torah. The more and more people violated. How? They start putting a prohibition against getting to, which we called a sauna. Like you have a dry sauna, hot, wet sauna. Soon we explain what does that mean. אמבטיות של כרכים מטייל בהם ואינו חושש. Those bathhouses of cities, one may stroll through them as usual, and he shouldn't be concerned about the prohibition of Shabbat, even if he sweat while doing it. So the idea here is the general places that they have a bathhouse, it wasn't like a wet sauna. So usually if you go to a dry sauna that the temperature is not too hot, some people walk in and out, they even stay there and they're not sweating at all, right? So even they put the decree or the issue of sweating, you can pass by those places if you don't intend to have this issue of coming out of because people not suspected you that you're planning to sit there and be there for a whole time in order to do this type of wet sauna. Mai ovrei avera. What does that mean? People who does sin, transgressions. דאמר רבי שמעון בן פזי אמר רבי יהושע בן לוי משום בר כפרה, בתחילה היו רוחצים בחמים שהוחמו מערב שבת, התחילו הבלנים להחם בשבת ואומרים מערב שבת הוא חמו. So the Yerushalmi explained it, that he said that at the beginning people will bath even on Shabbat in hot water that was heated before Shabbat, and then the people who walk in the bathhouse began to heat the water on Shabbat, and they said it was heated before Shabbat. Is that sounds familiar? So the Yerushalmi explained that these people didn't really did bishul, some type of heating or cooking in that sense on Shabbat, because the Gemara in Gittin said that we don't suspected people to do such a thing. But what happened is they warmed the bathhouse from their basement, right, in advance before Shabbat, and those hole was open, and as a result, those places was hidden on Shabbat. So what's the problem is? You remember that we explained that is a chitui begechalim. The person can take the coal and start stirring it on Shabbat. You remember we talked about it? So here the same problem is that some people may realize that it's not warm enough, and they go and start play around and tempted with this, and it's a violation. So therefore, the rabbi said that you cannot do that on Shabbat, even that you close those holes in advance and the water was warm up in advance. That's the Rashba said. So the problem is, they said, asru et hachamim. So therefore the sages prohibited bathing in hot water and permitted sweating. That was the beginning. והתירו את הזהב. ועדיין היו חוצים בחמים ואומרים מזיעים אנחנו. אסרו להם את הזהב והתירו חמי טבריה. And they were still bathed in hot water, and they said, we are sweating in that way and we enter the bathhouse. So the sages prohibited sweating and permitted bathing in the hot spring of Tiberias, which means they realized that people are not truthful. People said one thing and they do another thing, right? And they are in violation. So then, ועדיין היו רוחצים, they are still bathed in Tiberias, which the rabbi said, בחמי האור. ואומרים בחמי טבריה רחצנו. Again, people are not truthful, and people will still bathe in hot water heated by fire. But you ask them, what did they say? They said, whoa, we bathed in a hot spring of Tiberias. So therefore, the sages prohibited even a hot spring of Tiberias and permitted them in a bathhouse in cold water. Right? אסרו להם חמי טבריה ותירו את עצמם, ראו שאין הדבר עומד להם, התירו להם חמי טבריה, זה היה במקומה עומדת. So then the sages saw that the decree was not upheld by the people because of it's too strict, it's too stringent. So they permitted them to bathe in a hot spring of Tiberias, and the decree prohibited sweating remained in place, which means there is a concept that's called גזירה שאין הציבור יכול לעמוד בה. There are certain situations that you cannot impose upon public because people are not going to follow. So therefore the sages reached that point that they cannot impose on people anymore, and therefore they remove it, but still they put the decree against using the sauna on Shabbat. המרב ההיימן דעבר הרבנן שריה למקרה עבריינה. So he said that if one violated the decree of the sages, so it's permitted to call him a sinner. It's a famous Chafetz Chaim that when he speak about evil gossip, so he said that usually you shouldn't say any evil gossip at anyone. But the Meiri explained it, and the Chafetz Chaim explained it as well, that if it's something that create a situation that other people will follow, you're allowed to go ahead and tell people about a certain individual, and it's not considering Lashon Hara, because you're avoiding them from following his bad way. Right? Keman, how do you know that? Ki hai Tana, according to the Tana in the Braita, that's Mem Amud Bet, 40b. Now, we completed. אמבטיות של כרכים מטייל בהם ואינו חושש. אמר רבא דווקא כרכים אבל דכפרין לא, מה איתמה? כיוון דזוטרין נפשי תבלעיו. So explaining that the bathhouse of the city, one may scroll through them, even he sweats doing it, but he doesn't need to be, he should not be concerned. But Rava said that this applies specifically to what? To bathhouse in cities. But in villages, no. It's not apply. What's the reason? Because the bathhouse in the villages are small and the heat is great, and people who walk through them certainly cause them to sweat. Okay, so that's later we read the Rambam in Hallchot Shabbat that said that if a person not have the intent to use them for sweat purposes, he just pass by, it's not a problem. Now, תנו רבנן, מתחמם אדם כנגד המדורה ויוצא ומשתתף בצונן, מלבד שלא ישתתף בצונן ויתחמם כנגד המדורה. מפני שמפשיר מים שמעליו. Meaning you have a fire and the person, he is cold. Let's say you live in Alaska. Very cold, right? Below zero. So you go close to the heat on Shabbat and then you wash part of your body, because this brighter hole, that is not an issue to wash your body in the cold on Shabbat at all. Why? Because think about it. If you are standing next to the hut and you have this water on you, so the problem is, if you start with the cold water, that's the condition. If you start washing your body with the cold water, then you're sitting next to the fire, what's going to happen to you?
Dry and sweat.
Excellent, thank you, Gil. What happened is your body changed its status. Instead of being wet, now you dry your body. You make that cold water you basically warm them up, the water. So it's not that you are mevashel, you are cooking, right? But in a way, it's basically you change the status. Tosfot said that the reason is because next thing you see a person, he can go and use a hot water to warm off his entire body. He hold that it's like it's a snowball. You allow one thing, people go and take invent and go further down the drain. I remember one time I heard about Rabbi Ruderman in the Ner Israel Yeshiva. So people wants to use this type of method, and he said no, the students. Why? Because he said you start this way and then the next thing people just start warming up water on Shabbat. So the point is, it's a process that the rabbis are concerned. That's what Tosfot said. The Noda B'Yehuda here distinguish clearly between a cold water that is combination of cold and hot, and totally hot water. We try to explain that we have to differentiate between the three when it's come to washing on Shabbat. But again, we're not dealing here with this matter, but you see a lot of applications. For example, even you want to wash your hands for hamotzi, right? And you have a hot water, right? So it's an issue to use them on Shabbat. Anyway, Tanu Rabbanan, meichem adam aluntit umenicha al bnei me'aim beshabbat, ובלבד שלא יביא קומקומוס של מים חמים ויניחנו על בני מים בשבת, ודבר זה אפילו בכל אסור מפני הסכנה. A person have a stomach issue, especially if you talk about babies or elderly people and they have pain in some part of the body, such as usual pain is the stomach, some type of pain. So you can take this little towel and you basically warm that little towel and put it on your stomach on Shabbat, as long as you don't take the real utensil, the real part, and put it on your on your belly. Why? So Tosfot said, lest the water spill and come to wring it out, which is prohibited labor on Shabbat. But that the Gemara elaborated and said that place this kettle directly on his intestines is prohibited even a weekly due to danger involved, because it's extremely hot. It spill and scald the person, right? So now we said, תנו רבנן, מביא אדם קיטון מים ומניחו כנגד המדורה, לא בשביל שיחמו, אלא בשביל שתפק צינתן. Meaning, the Pnei Yoshua explained that you can take a water, you put it close to the fire. Now, here is the problem. If you are very cautious, you're very careful that this water will not be hit by the fire, that's fine. However, if you're not cautious, then is the issue that the minute you are close to a fire, you're basically heating them. So the only point here the most of the Farshim hold that if it's in a distance, it's fine, but if not, the fear is that the person forget them, and then he is fully bishul gamur, fully cooking them on Shabbat. So it's a problem. Most of the Meforshim said that, like Rashba, Ran, Ramban, Meiri, they said that it's a michzei. It looks like he is cooking, and therefore they said you cannot do it. But anyway, in general term, they said Rabbi Yehuda Omer מביאה אישה פח של שמן מניחתו כדי המדורה לו בשביל להשתלשל בשביל שיפשור. Here we need to make a differentiation between oil and water. What happened is the status of the oil, it's different, because in the oil it can change in a sense that it can warm and it's easy to use it, but the thing is if you control it to make sure that the heat is not overwhelming. In other words, it's not fully heat. So again, it's different than using water. Now we explained and we said רבן שמעון גמליאל אומר אישה סחה ידה שמן ומחממתה כנגד המדורה וסחה לבנה הקטן ואינה חוששת. He said that a woman may smear her hand with oil and heat in opposite the fire, and afterwards smear her young son with the heated oil, and she'll not be concerned about cooking on Shabbat. And that's basically not according to Rabbi Yehuda. Ibaileu shemen ma'u letana. Now we raise the question, what exactly the legal status of the oil? The Tana Kama, if you hold according to Rabbi Yehuda that you can use it, or according to Rabban Shimon Gamliel that forbids it. Rabba ve Rav Yosef damre travayu leitera. Both Rabba and Rav Yosef said that you can use it, that it's not the issue of cooking. Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak said leisura. Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak said you cannot use it because he said that it's indirect work. Rabba ve Rav Yosef damre travayu leisera. Now they elaborate. Shemen afal pi sha'at solet bo mutar. There is an issue of yad solelet, which means the minute you touch it, you jump because it's too hot. Okay, so he said in the oil it's different because the hand is jumping when you're touching a fire. So therefore, that oil that come out, it's not changing its status. Kasavar Tanakama shemen en bo mishum bishul. Shemen has no prohibition of cooking on Shabbat. Meaning that if you hold this oil is not cooking as you're cooking a scrambled egg, you basically, the mother put some oil on her hand here, and it's not the Igrot Moshe. Rabbi Feinstein said that the oil is not create any change by heating. The materials with the oil is different than the water, right? What is called CO2? What is the water?
H2O?
H2O, thank you. So that's a different materials than the oil. So he said, ועתה רבי יהודה למימר שמן יש בו משום בישול ואפשרו לא זהו בישולו. So Rabbi Yehuda said that yes, that's still a problem with oil because it's some type of cooking. ועתה רבן שמעון גמליאל שמן שיש בו משום בישול ואפשרו זהו בישולו. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said that you cannot use it only by shinui, which means you change it, you move it. That's basically leniency that you use by shinui, that you're changing it. You don't do it in a regular manner that you use it. But in basically, he holds that it's much biggest problem than the water. Water you can control it if it's a distance, but oil not. Now we go and explain Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar leisura. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said you cannot, like the first Tana that it's prohibited, to explain the dispute in the following manner. Shemen afal pi she'en hayad solet bo asur kasavar yesh bo mishum bishul ve'efshero zo bishilo. He said oil, even if the heat is not great, the hand spontaneously is recalled from it and it's prohibited to heat it. So he holds that the oil is subject to a prohibition of bishul, of cooking, and warming it is a tantamount to cooking. ועתה רבי יהודה למימר אפשרו לא זהו בשבילו. רבי יהודה can say it's like a lenient that warming it is not tantamount to cooking. ועתה רבן שמעון גמליאל למימר שמן יש בו משום בישול ואפשרו זהו בשבילו. And Rabban Shimon came to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda and he said that the oil is subject to the prohibition of cooking and warming is tantamount of cooking it. So the Gemara questioned and said Rabban Shimon Gamliel hainu tanakama. So they said that basically what Rabban Shimon Gamliel is identical to the opinion of the first Tana. So what is the difference between them? And they said there is a practical difference between them in a case where it's done in a backhanded manner, which means not as it typically done. So basically, for example, you pass by the hand of the woman. So by doing such a thing like that, it's okay. אמר רבי יהודה אמר שמואל אחד שמן ואחד מים יד סולט בהם אסור יד סולט בהם מותר. So Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel said both oil and water heated either one to the point that the hand spontaneously recoil from its prohibition, heating either one to the point where the hand does not spontaneously recoil, so it's permitted. What do you mean by saying that the minute the hand touch it, you jump, it's too hot? אמר רחבה כל שקרסו של תינוק נכווה. He says, the Rachava explained that any time that the baby's stomach to be scalded, it's considered water, which means it created damage for the baby belly. So that's considering that it's speaking about very little baby, like just born. אמר רבי יצחק בר אבדימי, פעם אחת נכנסתי אחר רבי לבית המרחץ, וביקשתי להניח לו פח של שמן באמבטי. One time I walked after the Rebbe in the bathhouse on Shabbat to assist him, and I sought to place a jar of oil in the bathtub for him to heat the oil somehow before rubbing it to him. So ve'amar li, and he said to me, Tol b'kli sheni v'ten. He said to me, take water from the bath in a secondary vessel, kli sheni, and then place it, the oil into it. So what do we derive from that? Shma min atlat. We learn three things. Number one, shma min shemen yesh bo mishum bishul. We learn number one that the oil is subject to the prohibition of cooking. Ushma mina kli sheni eno mevashel. So we explain that the second thing is that secondary vessel is not hot and does not cook. Ushma mina hefshero zo bishulo. And we learn from that warming it is a tantamount to cooking it. So it's a three important point. I wish to have more time to explain it, but in the practical halacha we go to those details. Hey avad achi. So we ask how Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did it. ואמר רבא בר חנא אמר רבי יוחנן בכל מקום מותר להרהר חוץ מבית המרחץ ובית הכיסא. He said that in any place you can think about Torah excluding a bathhouse and a bathroom. וכי תמה בלשון חול אמר לי, if you say that he speaks in the secular language, not in the holy tongue language, so the only talk in the Torah applied to the Hebrew language. ואמר אביי, דברים של חול מותר לאומרן בלשון קודש, של קודש אסור לאומרן בלשון חול. He hold that secular manners you can say in those places, but sacred manners may not be spoken in the bathhouse, even in the secular language. So how he did it? So he explained that afrushe mi isur hashane. So in order to prevent the individual from violating a prohibition, which is different, so he's allowed to do it. Teida, so you derive from that. You should know, דאמר רבי יהודה אמר שמואל, מעשה בתלמידו של רבי מאיר שנכנס אחריו לבית המרחץ, הוא ביקש להדיח קרקע. A story of a student of Rabbi Meir follow the bathhouse, and he sought to rinse the floor in order to clean it. So he said, הוא ביקש להדיח קרקע, אמר לו, רב מאיר said to him, אין מדיחין לסוך לו קרקע. So he said, Rab Meir said to him, you will not smear the floor with oil. So he said, אמר לו, אין סכין על מה הפרוש מאיסור השנה, הכנה מהפרוש לאיסור השנה. Apparently preventing one from violating a prohibition is different. So here too we said the same thing. The incident of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi preventing one from violating a prohibition is different and permitted. אמר רבינה שמע מינה. Ravina said we derive from that another thing. המבשל בחמית מרע בשבת חייב. One who used the Tiberius on Shabbat is liable. סקילה במזיד חטאת בשוגג because it's considering cooking. דעד מעשה דרבי לאחר גזרה הווה. The story of Rebbe happened after they put a decree, because it was after they put the decree in the bathhouse. ואמר לי, טול בכלי שני ותן. He told him to use a secondary vessel and place the oil on it. So he had to cook the oil and the hot water itself, he will have violated the Torah prohibition. Eini, they said, is that true? ואמר רב חיסדא, מבשל בחמית ורע בשבת פטור. רב חיסדא said that one who cook in Tiberius hot spring on Shabbat is not liable. מאי חייב נא בדקאמר. What's the meaning that liable? You meant to say, so Ravina explained, makat mardut, which means that they used to do it's a lashes of a person who rebellious, so that's a bad thing used to do it, so that's someone who used Chamit Vera is poto miskila mechatat, but anyway it's rabbinic prohibition. Amar Rabbi Zera anachaztil Rabbi Abod Ishat Ba'ambatei. Rabbi Zera said, I saw a bow floating in a bath on Shabbat, ולא ידען היה קר לא הקר, and I don't know if he lifted his feet or was actually swimming in the water. So he said, Pshila de la akar. It's obvious that he did not lift his feet. So he said, we learn in the Braita, לא ישוד, תניא, לא ישוד אדם בבריכה מלאה מים, אפילו עומדת בחצר. A person may not float in a pool full of water on Shabbat, and even the pool was in the courtyard, where there is no room for concern that he violated any prohibition. So they said, Lokashya ha deleit legidudei veha deit legidudei. Those brighter that forbids swimming in the pool, it's applied to a pool that have embankment surrounding, and the one that that it's like a river. The other one, it's really look like a big bathhouse, like a big tub. Rambam, הלכות Shabbat, chapter 22. חמין שהוחמו מערב Shabbat. Hot water that was heated on Friday, on Shabbat Eve. So if you have a hot water that was heated before Shabbat or on festival, may be used for washing one's face, hand and feet. But Magen Avraham said, but may not use to wash all or most of one's body, even if he washes one limb at a time. מרחץ שפקקו נקביו מערב Shabbat, if it's a bathhouse that opening was sealed on Shabbat Eve, so immediately after Shabbat it's permitted to bath in a bathhouse whose opening were sealed before Shabbat to prevent it from cooking. But if that opening was not sealed, one must wait sufficient time after Shabbat for the water to be heated. Now if it's Erev Yom Tov, it's a little different, because one is permitted to sweat in the bathhouse whose opening was sealed on the eve of festival, so it will not cooled off. Some authorities rule that one is even permitted to bathe in his entire body in water that was heated before the festival. That's the Magen Avraham said. However, he may only use that water to wash himself outside the bathhouse, using it in the outer room anyway is prohibited. The Tur said that washing even outside the bathhouse is not allowed. So again, it's a controversy. Now, in regard to ze'ah, that sweating, entering a bathhouse on Shabbat, like entering the sauna, in order to sweat, it's prohibited. Some authority hold that even passing through a bathhouse is a problem, but most of the rabbis say that it's not. The Mishnah Berurah said that it's a problem because it's considering some type of heat. Rinsing and warming is prohibited to rinse oneself with cold water and then warm oneself by standing next to a fire that is a tent mount to heating water on Shabbat. However, heating oneself next to a fire when there is rinsing in cold water is permitted. But in a situation like a person have a stomach issues or low back issues and others that he needs to put some hot, like in that little kettle, right? So placing a vessel containing hot water on one's stomach on Shabbat is prohibited, as the Braita said. Even on the weekly is prohibited because there's danger involved. However, placing a whole garment on one's stomach on Shabbat is permitted. Now, liquid opposite a bonfire. Placing water, oil, or other liquid near a fire is permitted as long as they will not reach a temperature at which one's hands spontaneously recoil from them. In other words, you touch it and you jump. These apply only to water and oil, and that's the Shmuel, that's Shulchan Aruch 3:18. Now, in regard to Kli Sheni, which is a long subject, not really we dealt much today, but very general statement, Shulchan Aruch 3:18 said, placing a jar of cold water into a secondary vessel is permitted. Placing it into a primary vessel is prohibited. Primary vessel is defined as a vessel that was heated on the fire, while the secondary vessel is one into which water or food are poured from a primary vessel. The sages establish a principle that the secondary vessel is not hot enough to cook what is inside that. Now, different halakhot we discussed today about hirhur, which means if you are in the certain spot like a bathhouse, bathroom. So he said, how about talking Torah or thinking about Torah? So he said it's prohibited to speak. Some rabbis said even think in the matter of Torah in the bathroom, in bathhouse, etc. in that place. That's the Mishnah Berurah. The same applied to a bathhouse. But again, if in the course of preventing someone from violating severe prohibition, you can speak Torah in the bathroom or bathhouse in those situations. In other words, it's if you want to avoid a severe violation. How about swimming or going to a place that is full of water? That's the last halakha of today. It is prohibited to swim on Shabbat, even in the pool in the courtyard. The Rambam said that in Hot Shabbat chapter 23, he said it is permitted though to swim in a pool with an edge around it that prevent the water from splashing outside the pool. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. But again, we basically rule that the person should not use the pool on Shabbat.
es Hashem